And I'm starting it on my end as well.
Okay. Oh, and let me make sure that I click the share sound. There we go.
Okay. Wait a minute. Somebody else is coming in, I guess.
Oh, that's just the auto.
Oh. Okay.
You can let that in and then you can start anytime you like. It's now 1 o'clock.
Okay. So hello, you guys. Thank you all for joining us for another series. Let me introduce myself. This series is called What's the Deal with Ableism? And we're going to explore ableism and learn about ableism. But my name is Cherise Smith, and I work with Partners for Inclusive Communities through the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And my co-presenter, Julie Patty, actually double booked herself because she is very, very popular in trainings, but she will be joining us sometime later on. We work on several different projects. We work on the project for Justice for All. I also work on a disability and health grant and just a lot of other different grants. So what's the deal with ableism? Let's find out. So next slide, please. Let's go over a little housekeeping rules, please. This training will be recorded. Participants are muted by default, but if you have a question or something, you want to unmute yourself, that's perfectly fine. This will be a very laid back, informal type training. So if you feel a need to say something, just unmute yourself. If you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself, then feel free to type it in the chat, and Doug will be monitoring the chat for any comments so that you can say whatever you like. Next slide. So today, what will we talk about? We will define ableism. We will give examples of ableism, and then we will be talking about people first language versus identity first language. And then we'll open it up for questions, which I'm sure there will be some, and comments. But like I said, you don't have to wait till the end to share those. Just have at it. So next slide. Before we get started on ableism, we want to give you some statistics that we have in the United States concerning disability. According to the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, 1 million adults in the US live with a disability. So that's 26%, that's 1 in 4. So 1 in 4 of every person on this call is an adult that may have some type of disability. And the percentage of people living with disability is highest in the South for a lot of different reasons. We'll explore that. That's a whole nother training where we could explore that, but we're gonna just move on. So what's ableism? Ableism is a type of prejudice or discrimination directed towards people with disabilities. It can include an attitude, a belief, or a practice that demonstrates a preference towards non-disabled people. And here's the thing about ableism. Ableism is a way of people seeming to be really, really nice and really, really polite, but it's also really rude and oppressive. So ableism can come in many forms. It could be a direct insult. It could be making fun of somebody, name calling, or it could be more subtle. And sometimes even a comment that at the surface may seem really nice. Like I said, it can have an ableist type behavior. This is This is because people are unconscious about their biases. It's like with racism or any other kind of ism. I don't know, but I am I am a woman of color uh, with long black hair, and I have a physical disability. And people often have said to me throughout my life, "Wow, you is that your real hair?" And I'm like, "Well, yes." They're like, "Oh, well, for a black woman, you have really beautiful thick hair, and that's a form of racism." And I've heard that many times. Or they'll ask me what I'm mixed with, just because I have long black hair and it looks healthy. For ableism, I have had people say things to me such as, "I can't believe you're working," or they're surprised that I'm college educated because I have a disability, or saying something like, "Well, if you can do that, then anybody can do that." And that's not necessarily true. So next slide. I get all revved up about ableism, y'all, as if y'all can't see. So other examples, what are some other examples of ableism? So I'll let Julie explain her story when she gets on, but one of the most one form of ableism that I noticed just recently was at my apartment complex. We're allowed dogs on the property. I have a dog that I walk every day, and one of the responsibilities is cleaning up your waste behind your dog. And the maintenance folks said, "Well, Sharice picks up her waste, then everybody should pick up their waste." And I'm like, "Well, I pick up my waste because I signed a contract, not because I'm some great, great, I'm some great rebel or something. I'm not, that's not, I'm trying to be a leader in waste control." So but ableism can come in other forms, like being uncomfortable around people with disabilities. Some people often think it's, impolite to stare, but not staring is just like saying that person doesn't exist. And me and Doug, before this call started, was talking, and Doug can chime in if he likes. We were talking about you don't know what you don't know, and you can't talk about experiences that you don't have. There's some folks on here from West Virginia. He told me the statistics of white Americans that live in West Virginia as opposed to African Americans or people of color of other cultures. So you don't know about people of color if you've never been around people of color. You don't know about people with disabilities unless you've been around and exposed to people with disabilities. So you can't, so I don't think it's impolite to stare, because it's not like I'm some creature from like a foreign, some kind of other planet or something. It's just people have no point of reference, and they don't know what to make of me, honestly. And that's not just because of my disability. To be perfectly honest with you, people don't know what to make of me as soon as I open my mouth. So, but that's fine. So making assumptions about a person with a disability, based on their disability, like I use a wheelchair, so people assume I'm good at computers. Blind people must play the piano. I often hear people say, "Well, if a person is blind or deaf or hard of hearing, then their other senses must be great because they have this particular disability." Or avoiding interacting with people altogether for fear, people with disabilities, for fear altogether, because you fear you will make a mistake. I often get children that come up and want to play with my wheelchair and want to touch my wheelchair, or they stare, and their parents often are just so embarrassed that I'm like, "Well, that's fine. They've never seen a wheelchair, so what would they know?" Of course, they're curious. They're children. And I often say I'd rather educate a child than try to educate an adult. It's easier to fix. So there's just too many to name. Next slide. So language equals perception. How you speak about a person often, or how you feel about a person often talks about how you talk to a person. It will dictate how you talk about a person. If you are, if you're uncomfortable around people with disabilities, or you don't think people with disabilities are just as good as you are, or if people of color are not just as good as you are, or women are not just as good as you are, then the way you speak will show itself, and vice versa. So the way you speak about informs about how you perceive them. So like those poor people, this, this is a form of ableism that gives off this sense that people with disabilities are to be pitied. And this is a Southern thing, you will often hear Southern people say, oh, bless their heart. That's their favorite Southern, bless their hearts. And it's like, because they pity them. People with disabilities, I do want to be respected and understood just like everybody else. And people with disabilities aren't special. I promise you, there's nothing special about me based on my disability. And there was a story I was told by one of my coworkers. She said, this guy who used a wheelchair said, I'm not special, but if there's no accessible bathroom and I can't go to the bathroom, things get really special really quick if I can't go to the bathroom. So we are not special. Ableism is when language and perception collide. Next slide. So we're gonna watch a short video, and it's about casual ableism and why we use disability to describe things that are negative, because we often do that. Doug, take it away.
Hello. It's Let's Talk Tuesday, so let's talk about casually ableist language. Ableism, specifically casual ableism, is widely accepted in our society, particularly when it comes to our language. No wonder most people don't care about access or equality when it comes to people with disabilities if our everyday language perpetuates the idea that they are lesser. Ableism is constantly used to insult others or describe something as negative. And oftentimes, people don't even realize where these words are coming from, what these words mean. So, warning, I'm about to possibly throw out some slurs and otherwise really offensive terms for people with disabilities for sake of example. First, there's using disabilities as insults. Remember those campaigns to stop saying, that's so gay? Because why are you using homosexuality to express something negative? Okay, so in that same breath of campaigns, creating awareness of harmful language, like the use of the R word, we should have included the word lame. Do you know what lame means? It means someone who can't walk, or walks with pain and or difficulty. Ding, 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 ding. After learning the word's true definition, go ahead, look it up for yourself. I promise you, that's what the dictionary will say. And I certainly no longer feel comfortable using it in that way. It's very clear that people knew what it meant, and they started using it to describe things in a negative way. Now, things like the word lame are, for the most part, very unintentional. A lot of people do not know what that word means or where it comes from. But then, another common thing is how people literally use disability in order to insult or condescend to someone. What are you, blind? Are you deaf? What is wrong with you? Are you mentally ill? You need help. You seriously need help. Nut job? Psycho? How can you be so stupid? What if we are actually blind or visually impaired? What if we are actually deaf or hard of hearing? What if we actually do struggle with mental illness or mental disability? When one asks such things in this context, when you use this as a way to condescend or insult, you're doing it with implications that a disability makes you less than. Then there's using a disability and mental/chronic illness as an expression. Yeah, I'm super OCD about my books. Oh my god, what the I'm sorry, I can get so bipolar sometimes. You're so ADD. Even a blind man can see. Diabetes. Appropriating language from sick and disabled communities is harmful. Saying things like that diminishes what those words really mean. And it makes it harder for people who actually deal with these disorders and illnesses to openly discuss them and be taken seriously. Not only that, but these metaphors and references are extremely ignorant, like not even close to what those terms actually mean. Let's use, for example, the misuse of the word trigger. And so now it's made fun of, it's taken less seriously, but triggers are a real thing. And if you're not a terrible person, you should probably respect that it happens and do small things that you can do to be considerate. People with PTSD and other mental illnesses know very well that moving through the world is hard, that things come without warning. But if we can make things just a little bit safer by warning someone of content ahead, then why not? Ultimately, my point is, we need to constantly examine our actions, our language, our ableism, if we want to evolve in that respect. Ultimately, these terms are taken less seriously as a result of appropriation and misuse. And it's a real shame that the things that can be so stigmatized and difficult to talk about in the first place are that much more difficult to talk about because people chose to do so. So as usual, I love for Let's Talk Tuesday to start a conversation in the comments. So please share with me your experiences, and I will see you eventually. Bye.
Okay, so that's a great video. I love that video. I came across that video, I don't know, when we were looking for content for this training. So let's talk about that. What did you notice about the video, and can you think of a time you heard or even used ableist language? Anybody brave enough to say they, because I've done it. I've done it.
I've heard people say to people with disabilities out of frustration, but that doesn't matter. Things like, how many times do you have to be told this before you get it? Or, you know, things like that. I also had a friend years ago who every time her daughter would stumble, she would call her Helen for Helen Keller.
Wow.
And it gives me goosebumps just saying that out loud again. Just
yeah.
They moved out of state. I never knew what became of that young lady, the daughter, but it has bothered me for 40 years.
Wow. Yeah. So we have
let's see, in the chat, Craig says, lame is definitely a word. I never looked up the definition before. I never knew that one. And then Lindsay says, ableist language is everywhere. It's so frustrating.
Craig, Craig made a great point. You know, lame is definitely a word. I never looked for that. You don't know what you don't know. And a lot of people don't know what, because words have been taken so far out of context. Like the R word used to mean, oh, that's so crazy. They used to say, oh, that's so R word. I'm like Dee Dee, I'm gonna say it, but crawls up my back to say the word retarded. And people say, I used to say, oh, that's so retarded. Because that's what I mean is that's so crazy, because I didn't realize the true meaning, or it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. And some people never looked up a definition for a word, so they just use it because it's been taken from the actual meaning to be plugged into something else. So instead of saying that's so crazy, you say lame or the R word. I can't say it twice. I just can't. So ableist language is everywhere, unfortunately. And and symbols of ableism is everywhere, Lindsay. I think that's a great point.
Morgan has his hand up.
Morgan, you can talk.
He's trying to find unmute. There we go.
Yeah, I had to. One I heard is "That's So Gay."
Mm-hmm.
They actually did a few sets of commercials a while back, where they had Wanda Sykes and other like actors and actresses talking about when you say that word, you're actually demeaning people who are gay. And I love them so much, I share them. And it's like when people say that now, it's like, do you realize what you're saying? Yeah.
Right.
It's a bit disrespectful.
And people don't realize, I think, Morgan, to your point, people say things so casually now but it's great that you took the time to say, are you really thinking about that? Because a lot of people don't think about it. People can be very thoughtless with their language and what they say, when honestly, they don't mean any harm. They really don't. But the words that we use now are so taken out of context that people just run with it. They just run with it and they just go. And sometimes, like, I use a wheelchair and people are sometimes scared to say, well, can you walk over here? And sometimes I'll be a smart aleck and be like, well, no, I can't. Or can you walk to the store or something like that? No, I do that to make them feel uncomfortable, because people take the wrong things out of context that they shouldn't. And so, but I like that they draw that line there also, because they don't want to offend. But it's okay to offend if you're willing to get the education.
Lewis has his hand up, but before we call on Lewis, Lindsay says, that's crazy, that's mad, that's psycho. All of these phrases are very overused and insensitive to people who experience mental illness. That's what you typed in the chat.
Absolutely. And like, people will say, oh, I feel triggered, when triggers are a real thing that should not be casually mentioned. So I think you're right on, Lindsay, with saying things like mad, crazy. And we at my office, we've made a concerted effort recently to look at that when we say it, saying things like that, or saying that's insane or something like that. So I think that's a good point. We have two participants raising their hand. Lewis, you want to go first?
Some people, people make fun people like in school with the disability, like in school, make fun people and call people names in school, and like and the kids or someone don't know about disability, they call people names.
Right. And that's a good point, Lewis. When people in school, that's why we need to, I always tell people, if you catch people when they're young, by the time they get our ages or older, you won't have these issues if you educate them when they're young. But we don't always have the space. But it's important, like when Lewis is saying, that those people are told, it's not really cool to say, to call people with disabilities names or to reference a disability when you're talking to somebody. So that's a great point, Lewis. Somebody else had their hand up?
Melissa does.
Melissa, go ahead.
I know in the video she was talking about PTSD, and as someone who has PTSD, at the job that I had before I come to the art to work, they knew that I had PTSD, and they would still do things to upset me, or they would come behind me and scare me, and then they would laugh at me because I would jump or whatever. And then I'd say, well, you know, I have PTSD. And they would say, I know, but it's funny. So that's some of the things I've had to go through.
Well, Melissa, first of all, I am very sorry that happened to you, because it's wrong and there's no excuse for it, and they should not have done that. And I think what happens is with language, people use these languages so freely and so casually that when a person with a disability who really has PTSD, they take it lightly when it's a very serious thing, like PTSD, like OCD, or some of the mental health and hidden disabilities that people can't see. People say it so casually that when they're confronted with someone who really who has that diagnosis, they don't treat them with respect, and they take it so lightly. Do we have some more comments?
I don't see any in the chat. The only comment I would make while we're paused for just a moment, I also think that many people, and I've heard this for years, people confuse when anyone says you shouldn't use that language, they somehow believe that that's, well, you're just being politically correct. They don't see it as a being disrespectful to people. They see it as a political correctness that they need to fight against. And it's like, well, I'm going to be a comedian, or I'm going to be a spokesperson, and I'm not going to be politically correct. And that's completely different than being disrespectful, which is what using those the ableist language is.
Right. I think you're absolutely correct. People think, oh, you just want us to be really politically correct. It has nothing to do with politics. It's just a common decency and respectfulness towards your fellow humans. And that's all we're asking for. And one thing that I looked in the chat, it says there are too many people that believe PTSD is something that only happens to soldiers. You know what? That's a great point. There have been people who have had childhood traumas, who have been in abusive relationships and had abusive childhoods, who've had traumatic events happen to them. Maybe they were attacked, or maybe they were in a holdup and developed PTSD. And then people think only soldiers can have it because they've seen the worst of the worst. You don't know what somebody has gone through, and it's manifested itself into PTSD.
Lindsay also says one thing she encounters is people saying, well, what am I supposed to say?
And I like when people say that, when they say, what am I supposed to say? And then I have to have an answer for them. You have to have an answer for them, or if you don't know, say, well, I don't, let's find out together. I always say, ask somebody with a disability. But I say, you definitely don't use this term. You definitely don't do that. So when they say, well, what am I supposed to say? Well, say this instead. Give them an option of something else to say. And when they make it a practice of not using that language and replacing it with something else, that it'll become muscle memory. Do we have anybody else that have anything else to say?
Let me see. It says, and Julie has joined us, by the way.
Oh,
Lindsay says, I usually ask, well, what were you trying to say? And they will respond with, well, you aren't paying attention or something. And I say, well, then say that. Typically, people just need encouraged to widen their vocabulary.
that would be awesome if we can get people to widen their vocabulary. And when you said, you made a great point, Lindsay, you said, you know, they say, well, what are they supposed, you ask them, well, what are you trying to say? What were your intentions, or what were you trying to say? Because there's a better way of putting it. So I think that's a great point. Do we have any other comments?
I don't see any more in the chat.
Does anybody else have any questions that they want to raise their hand or want to unmute themselves?
Charisse, I have a comment or a question for you.
Okay.
So when you have a mental illness and like an intellectual disability,
Mm-hmm.
people say, and I've heard this, that they shouldn't have to walk around you. Or I guess what I want to say is they don't think that they should have to walk on eggshells for you. They don't care what triggers you.
That I would say to that, I'm not asking you to walk on eggshells. I'm asking you to be respectful.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking you to do. I'm not asking you to, I don't want you to walk on eggshells with me. I want you to be comfortable. But there's a difference between walking on eggshells and being disrespectful. Now, when I hear somebody say something that is ableist or disrespectful, I don't get angry generally if they don't know, because they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Now, if I tell you and you continue to do it, then I'm mad. You know, then I'm upset. But I have to tell people my job is to educate you and to show you, you know, what is appropriate. Now, if you keep doing it, then you're doing it on purpose, being an ableist. And that's not somebody I want to hang with or somebody I want to interact with. And I think that's something you can tell them.
Yeah.
Julie, do you have something you want to add?
No, I totally agree with you, Sheree. We get to choose who we hang out with, right?
Yeah.
And that
And-
respect should be whether you're disabled or not.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, exactly right. And if we can respect people's religions and race and sex, we can in sexual preferences, then we need to respect people's disabilities as well. It needs to be extended all across the board.
I think sometimes too, people get kind of mixed up between like and respect. You don't have to like somebody to be respectful. You know, we don't all get along with everybody that we ever come in contact with, you know, and maybe we don't particularly like somebody for whatever reason, but it doesn't mean we can't be respectful.
Yep.
Absolutely correct. We're going to go to the next slide, if that's our conversation. So there's so much language, and these are some of the things that we came up with that's just, the language is just wrong all over the place. It's all bad. So the R word, like I said, that I couldn't say twice because I've already said it once. There's deaf and dumb, deaf mute, invalid, limited, defects. My personal hatred, my personal favorite, wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair, victim of, suffering from, deformed, or even normal, the word normal. There's also another one, and that's vulnerable. Thinking because you have a disability, then you're vulnerable to something. And that's just simply not true. So, Julie, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, so the word vulnerable is really adds to the ableism and puts people with disabilities in a not safe place, you know. So, I mean, I always say we can be in vulnerable situations, that like should be said. Just because we have disabilities doesn't make us vulnerable. I think me and Sharice are pretty outspoken.
Yeah, and also I think it causes a problem with, because people with disabilities can be offenders as well. They really, and so if all people with disabilities are vulnerable, you're saying they can't be an offender, which causes
Yeah.
a whole nother set of issues. Doug, you got something to say?
Well, I just wanted to add, many times in some of the trainings from years ago and in train, people will say vulnerable populations or the disabled group, and they do that. They're trying to be more respectful than the newspaper thing that says the disabled, but it's really no better to say vulnerable population. So I think, like you're saying, to educate, there does need to be maybe more education or an appropriate list so that people who want to do better can say, all right, let's not say these things. What should we say? Because some people don't, again, we don't know what we don't know. So some people may say, well, I'm trying to be respectful. I didn't use the R word, but I don't know what to say. So maybe part of our education might be more on, okay, what do you say?
So instead of the word vulnerable, we say other training that we did that people may be at a higher risk of violence, or so it better to say at a higher risk. So,
And sometimes when I'm talking about populations like people with disabilities or a certain, I say underserved populations.
yeah.
That's a really good one that covers a lot of ground.
Hey, Sharice, you don't like what wheelchair bound? You don't sleep in your wheelchair?
I never have slept in my wheelchair on purpose. And in terms of being confined to my wheelchair, despite people's best efforts, I've never been strapped down in my wheelchair. So no, I don't care for that much. I don't care for that very much. Next slide. Then there's euphemisms. And I have seen disability organizations use these. And there's disabled, putting the disability, putting the ability, and what they're trying to do is stress the ability part, but totally discount the disabled part, the dis part, or the part that says can't. Handicapable, which I don't even know that that's a word. I just don't. I don't think that I think that's just not a word. Okay. I just don't think it is. Differently abled. I hate this term. It's like nails on a chalkboard. What you're trying to say is I'm differently abled. All of us are differently abled.
Yep.
It doesn't take away from the fact that I have a disability. Physically challenged. Yeah, that's in the same boat as differently abled. And people are, when they say these things, they're really trying to be respectful. That's the thing. They're, like Doug said, you don't know what you don't know. And they're trying to come up with something to be respectful, and they're just not good at it. Special needs. We talked about special needs. I've known Julie for 20 years. She's not special. She's just not. She's a lovely human being, which is why she's one of my bestest of friends, but she's not special because she has a disability. She's special because she's funny. She's special because she's good, great to talk to. She's special because we have a lot of fun together, but nothing about her disability is special. All of us have different needs, but they're not special. Julie, you have anything?
I got special needs if I don't have my coffee in the morning.
Yeah, if me and her don't have our coffee in the morning, things get really special really quickly.
Yeah.
And it ain't pretty, let me tell you.
So serious, I think people who are non-disabled, they use the euphemisms to make themselves feel more comfortable, about disability. But I don't know about you, I'm proud to be a disabled woman,
I'm so proud, and I wouldn't personally have it any other way.
Yeah.
And people say these words to not trip over themselves or anything, but they're tripping all over themselves, and they don't know. They're trying to be respectful, they just don't know how. So it's kind of like what you were saying earlier. What do you say?
Yeah, I really wish we would get rid of special needs, but I know I don't want to offend anybody, but I know a lot of parents use that terminology. So,
Yeah.
in special education, I wish we could call it inclusive education.
Absolutely.
Morgan, let's see. Catherine says it's so common in schools, and Morgan says, I hate when people use the R word. For one, it's demeaning to individuals with disabilities, and two, I work with individuals that is harmful to them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes, it runs a chord through me to the point where if I hear somebody use it, I'm like, do I need to educate you on how dangerous this word is?
Absolutely right. That's why like I said, it ran a cold chill through my spine to have to say it earlier, and I was hoping I'm hoping the recording stopped. So, it's not a word I use, and I don't like it, and I don't like people using it in my presence.
Yeah.
So, next slide. Julie, would you like to take this, or you want me to continue?
Whatever you want me to do, Cherise.
Well, you go ahead and talk for a minute.
So we have people first language and we have identity first language. And you all probably know about people first language, putting the person first. He is a person with a disability. People with disabilities. Now, Cherise can tell you, I used to be really strict about using people for language, but I have, and language has evolved over the years, and I don't mind being called a disabled person, a disabled parent, people with autism, they prefer to be called autistic. And people who are deaf prefer to be called deaf. So, but I always say, everybody has a name. Call us by our name, So, anything else, Cherise?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I take a lot of sign language classes because I am passionate about sign language. And one of my teachers, who is deaf herself, she teaches the class, and she says she hates the term hearing impaired, and a lot of deaf people hate the term hearing impaired because it makes it seem like something is broken.
Right.
And she says it sounds to them like it's needing to be repaired instead of embracing it. And I think, and Julie, you can share your thoughts. I think people first language is for people who are first getting into the disability community and first learning. It's a good way to get them to get used to respectful language by recognizing the person first and then going into their disability, and I think it's a great way to train your mind and then going into identity first language. But like Julie, I embrace my disability, and I say disabled. I'm disabled all the time. I also say I use a wheelchair. So I'm not bound or confined or anything like that, mind you. But I often say I'm a disabled person. I'm in a wheelchair. I just say that. So
People first language started because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were being referred to by their by the label, like the R word. And so when people wanted to get out of institutions and live in the community, be more integrated, that's how people first language evolved. See me as a person, let me make my choices, let me choose where I want to live, you know. So,
yeah.
but
Okay. Do we have any other comments or anything we want to say before the next slide? Next slide, please. So we're gonna watch this really good video, and it's by, her name is Stella
Young.
Young. I completely froze on her name. She's not with us anymore. She passed away, but she has this thing called Not Your Inspiration. Thank you very much. I'm not your inspiration. Thank you very much. Because, you know, people with disabilities, we're very inspirational. I know Julie is such an inspiration. It's ridiculous, okay? Her existence is an inspiration because, you know, she's not even here for me to make fun of her. But so don't tell her I said that. So
She's
we're gonna
so
watch.
inspired by you, Sharice, she walked away.
Yeah, I know, right? So we're gonna watch this video and then we're gonna have some conversation.
All right, here we go.
Doug, can you stop it for a second?
I grew up in a very small country town in Victoria. I had a very normal.
You can rewind it. I forgot to tell you, I think there is some language in this one. So, you know, be aware. Okay, that's it.
Okay.
I grew up in a very small country town in Victoria. I had a very normal, low-key kind of upbringing. You know, I went to school, I hung out with my friends, I fought with my younger sisters. It was all very normal. And when I was 15, a member of my local community approached my parents and wanted to nominate me for a Community Achievement Award. And my parents said, that's really nice, but there's kind of one glaring problem with that. She hasn't actually achieved anything. Yeah, and they were right, you know. I went to school, I got good marks, I had a very low-key after-school job in my mum's hairdressing salon, and I spent a lot of time watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Dawson's Creek. Yeah, I know, what a contradiction. But they were right, you know, I wasn't doing anything that was out of the ordinary at all. I wasn't doing anything that could be considered an achievement if you took disability out of the equation. Years later, I was on my second teaching round in a Melbourne high school, and I was about 20 minutes into a Year 11 legal studies class when this boy put up his hand and said, "Hey, miss, when are you going to start doing your speech?" And I said, "What speech?" You know, I'd been talking to them about defamation law for a good 20 minutes. And he said, "You know, like your motivational speaking. You know, when people in wheelchairs come to school, they usually say like inspirational stuff. Yeah. It's usually in the big hall. And that's when it dawned on me. This kid had only ever experienced disabled people as objects of inspiration. We are not, you know, to this kid, and it's not his fault. I mean, that's true for many of us. You know, for lots of us, disabled people are not our teachers or our doctors or our manicurists. We're not real people. We are there to inspire. And in fact, you know, I'm sitting on this stage looking like I do in this wheelchair, and you are probably kind of expecting me to inspire you, right? Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you dramatically. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to tell you that we have been lied to about disability. Yeah, we've been sold the lie that disability is a bad thing. Capital B, capital T. It's a bad thing. And to live with disability makes you exceptional. It's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make you exceptional. And in the past few years, we've been able to propagate this lie even further via social media. You know, you may have seen images like this one. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Or this one, your excuse is invalid, indeed. Or this one, before you quit, try. Yeah. These are just a couple of examples, but there are a lot of these images out there. You know, you might have seen the one, the little girl with no hands drawing a picture with a pencil held in her mouth. You might have seen a child running on carbon fibre prosthetic legs. And these images, you know, there are lots of them out there. They are what we call inspiration porn. And I use the term porn deliberately because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So in this case, we're objectifying disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. The purpose of these images is to inspire you, to motivate you, so that we can look at them and think, well, however bad my life is, it could be worse. I could be that person. But what if you are that person? I've lost count of the number of times that I've been approached by strangers wanting to tell me that they think I'm brave or inspirational. And this was long before my work had any kind of public profile. They were just kind of congratulating me for managing to get up in the morning and remember my own name. And it is objectifying. These images objectify disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. You know, they are there so that you can look at them and think that things aren't so bad for you, to put your worries into perspective. And life as a disabled person is actually somewhat difficult. We do overcome some things, but the things that we're overcoming are not the things that you think they are. They are not things to do with our bodies. I use the term disabled people quite deliberately because I subscribe to what's called the social model of disability, which tells us that we are more disabled by our bodies, the society that we live in rather, than by our bodies and our diagnoses. So I've lived in this body a long time. I'm quite fond of it. It does the things that I need it to do, and I've learnt to use it to the best of its capacity, just as you have. And that's the thing about those kids in those pictures as well. They're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They are just using their bodies to the best of their capacity. So is it really fair to objectify them in the way that we do, to share those images? People, when they say, you know, you're an inspiration, they mean it as a compliment. They mean it as a compliment. And I know why it happens. It's because of the lie. It's because we've been sold this lie that disability makes you exceptional. And it honestly doesn't. And I know what you're thinking. You know, I'm up here bagging out inspiration. You're thinking, geez, Stella, aren't you inspired sometimes by some things? And the thing is, I am. I learn from other disabled people all the time. I'm learning not that I'm luckier than them, though. I am learning that it's a genius idea to use a pair of barbecue tongs to pick up things that you drop. I'm learning that nifty trick where you can charge your mobile phone battery from your chair battery. Genius. We are learning from each other's strength and endurance, not against our bodies and our diagnoses, but against a world that exceptionalizes and objectifies us. I really think that this lie that we've been sold about disability is the greatest injustice. It makes life hard for us. And that quote, "the only disability in life is a bad attitude," the reason that that's bullshit is because it's just not true. Because of the social model of disability, no amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a rap. Never. Smiling at a television screen isn't going to make closed captions appear for people who are deaf. No amount of standing in the middle of a bookshop and radiating a positive attitude is going to turn all those books into Braille. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I really want to live in a world where disability is not the exception, but the norm. I want to live in a world where a 15-year-old girl sitting in her bedroom watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer isn't referred to as achieving anything because she's doing it sitting down. I want to live in a world where we don't have such low expectations of disabled people that we are congratulated for getting out of bed and remembering our own names in the morning. I want to live in a world where we value genuine achievement for disabled people. And I want to live in a world where a kid in year 11 in a Melbourne high school is not one bit surprised that his new teacher is a wheelchair user. Disability doesn't make you exceptional, but questioning what you think you know about it does. Thank you.
All right, that was awesome. Do we have any questions or thoughts about that video that y'all wanna share?
I love that video.
It's one of my favorites. I've watched it several times. Do we have anything?
I love the term inspiration porn. That is awesome.
Ain't it though?
Oh yeah, that is great.
And she was totally right. I use a wheelchair, and no amount of smiling at them and radiating positivity has ever got me up those stairs. It's not a superpower. I had a similar experience to her. They wanted to give me a citizenship award because they thought I was an inspiration when I was a teenager. And my mother says, well, she talks back, she's got a D in math, and she won't clean her room. She is not an inspiration to anybody.
I never heard that story.
Yeah, well, I was what's the appropriate word for what I was as a kid? So,
Liz says it puts things in perspective. Thank you for sharing. And Lindsay says such a good video. Chira says, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, she says the word you're looking for is sassy.
I was very sassy. I'm very sassy.
You still are, Teresa.
You know what though, Julie? That's unnecessary, really unnecessary.
No, I love you.
Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and if we don't have any other questions, we're gonna launch our poll.
All right, now I think the poll is going to have to be launched from one of the other offices because I'm logged in two different.
Yeah, I'm gonna launch it.
Okay, so if you can launch the poll, that'd be great. If it'll let you.
It let me. So there goes the poll, you guys. Please fill it out.
Hang on, let me stop sharing for a moment, see if it's, do you all, yeah. So if you see the poll, do that, that's great. I don't see it because I'm a host, so.
Yeah, it's
So if you wouldn't mind reading the poll,
Result.
and also we have I'm going to put in the chat, if you all would fill out an evaluation form, if you click on after you're done with the poll, if you go to click on the link that's in the chat.
So it says, what state do you live in? Arkansas, Virginia, Ohio, or other? We got some Ohio. I have a friend that lives in Ohio, lives in Columbus. Which category does your organization fall under or most closely relate to? Disability organization, non-governmental, educator, faith-based, healthcare professional, law enforcement, legal, mental health, victims advocate, victims assistant, and are you an advocate? And let's see, it looks like we have 100% of people have answered this. No, it says 20, no, it hasn't. It says 72% of people have participated.
I don't know if it counts the hosts and co-hosts, so there may be more people that.
Yeah,
can't
it's
fill it out.
the percentage is bumped up to 76. So I'm gonna give it a couple of about another minute or so. People are turning theirs in. I know several of us that are co-hosts can't do it, so I think that's it because it's up to 89%.
Again, please fill out the evaluation. Liz says, thank you so much for this great training. Dee Dee wanted to know where to find the videos. I've got the links, so if anyone wants those, I can share that. And please fill out our evaluation so we can get those, see if you like these things and if something we need to continue similar trainings in the future.
Yeah. And
So
you can get,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Dee Dee, you can get these on YouTube, but Doug, if you want to share these videos out, since people really enjoyed them, you can feel free to send it out to the email list.
All right.
So I was just gonna say, don't forget, next week we have one more training. Don't worry, be safe. So.
Yeah, we have one more training, and then that'll be it. Do we have any other questions before we depart, or
Same
anything
bat
else we want to say?
channel. Same bat channel, same bat time.
Yes, same bat channel, same bat time. It'll be 12 o'clock Central and 1 o'clock Eastern.
Yes.
Yep.
So wherever you're at, work it out.
Work out. Good. Sound like you went well. Good job, Shirley.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
she did
y'all
a
for
great
coming.
job while you were off doing other.
Yeah, while you were saving the world, Julie.
That's right. She took her fancy background down too.
Well, that was for the institute I was speaking at. I don't, yeah.
Oh, we only rate the regular background. I see.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
So do we,
come on, Doug. Give me a break.
No.
I give you background.
So Doug, do me and Julie need to stay on the call?
I think it's all good. We'll make sure it all runs smooth next time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Sharice. And thank you everybody for being on again. One more time.
You're welcome.
Fill out that form.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all, Lewis, Charles, Dee Dee,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you to our transcriber.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Awesome,
Catherine,
yeah.
and all the
See
new
you
people
next
who've been
week.
on. We appreciate you all, Jennifer, everyone. So thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
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 See you next week.
Okay.